think I know most of you, but just in case I don't, nice to see you here today. And I am sorry that I missed last week, but you haven't missed a thing because we're going to do it all right here, right now. So first of all, who is Wallace Short? Any ideas? He's a big name in Sioux City, right? No, you never hear about him, do you? So what makes Wallace Short so important? What makes him special? Why would we spend an hour talking about him? Okay, well, that's what we're here to find out, right? So, Wallace Short. This is certainly one of the most remarkable people to ever occupy the mayor's position in Sioux City, Iowa. And he did it at a critical time in American history. Now, I'll just ask, do you feel, when you go through your daily life, do you feel what's happening nationally really has a whole lot to do with you today? You know, a lot of times we get through our day without really worrying. They're talking about a lot of big things, right? And it's important things, but it may or may not come right down to us on Main Street. Well, at this moment in time, at the point when Wallace Short was mayor of Sioux City, all of those things that were happening nationally, that were important nationally, were being played out on the streets of Sioux City. That's what we're going to see about. Now also remember, we have to get our head around this, but this was at a time when the mayor's position was a vital one. It was an important one. It was a strong mayor's position. They had the ability to appoint important people. And remember, it was the commission form of government, so when you got elected, that elected job put you in charge of different departments, depending on which one you got elected into. So that also becomes vitally important. Public safety, things like that. The police chief is appointed by the mayor. The different positions are appointed by the mayor. This is no small thing. But who was he? Well, interestingly enough, he's born in 1866 near College Springs, Iowa, and I don't know if you know where that is, but you know Hamburg is the last exit on the interstate, right? So over here, of course, we've got Nebraska, we've got Iowa, go straight across, there's College Springs, just a few miles north of Missouri. Now, 1866, which side was Missouri on in the Civil War? They weren't sure either, trust me. But the point being, feelings ran high at that point. He was born at a time when decisions and beliefs mattered. All right? There was nothing passive about any of this. And of course, Iowa was strongly a unionist state. Right? In fact, Iowa, per capita, supplied more people to the Civil War than any other state on a percentage basis. All right? So, as a farm boy, he could only attend school when he wasn't needed on the farm. What that meant was he only attended about 4 months out of the school year. Yet with all of that, at 21, he would enroll in college in Wisconsin. In 1896, at the age of 30, he would graduate from Yale. And he would become a congregational minister. And this was a strong calling with him. And this is another point that I'm making. This was a different time. It's a different time, and we need to think about those times. It's before the Progressive Era. It's the end of the Gilded Age. Now, we heard those terms in school, but we need to think what that meant. That meant that business held all the cards, and they ruled their businesses with a very harsh hand. There is no safety net, there is no protection, and in fact there are no protections on the job. You could just as easily be injured, and it could be a life-threatening injury, or at the very least a catastrophic injury that meant you were never going to work again. And remember, there's no outlet, there is no relief for that, except perhaps churches through the charity. Business excesses and government inaction go hand in hand. Government was absolutely determined that they would do nothing to rein in businesses. And that's what's going to usher in the Progressive Era. is led by churches holding the banner of social justice. What do I mean by social justice? They're the ones out there saying this isn't right. It should not be this way. We should care about others. I know it's a strange concept, isn't it? But that's what it is, and that was the time. So, as you know, I always try and frame my talks so you have something to hold on to as we go through this. What's the situation in Sioux City as 1910 dawns, in 1920? And is it in sync with the country at this time? In other words, there's a lot of times you're just out here on your own. Sioux City, for much of its life, was that way, wasn't it? It's out here and hanging out in the northwest corner of Iowa. It's a long ways from Des Moines. You worry about your laws, we'll worry about ours. That was Sioux City. Well, we're going to look at what's happening as the 20th century is dawning. Why is Wallace Short distrusted by business owners before he's ever elected? Yes, he actually gets elected. He's not appointed. He doesn't get into it by happenstance. He will be elected mayor. And then the bigger question that we really want to make sure we get to, what does Wallace Short actually achieve? I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I got to be mayor, right? How often does a guy that's standing up for labor get to be mayor? Well, I got to be mayor. That's good. I broke that ceiling, glass or otherwise. No problem, right? But what do you actually achieve? And that's what I'm going to ask you when we get through with all this. So, got those? Here we go. We're looking north on Pierce from 3rd Street. That's the Martin Apartments over there. My point that I want to make is national and local events intersect on Main Street at this point. There are big changes coming down in America. It's sweeping across the country, mainly because of all those excesses. And what's the major excess? Of course, it's unbridled immigration, right? More people coming into the country than ever before. What's that mean? Why does that matter? All right. I want you to think, though, for a moment. Sioux City at the end of the 19th century, that is a town on the move. This was a place that's growing, that's going, that is turning into an important town. And they expect it to be more than just important. They expect it to be the next Chicago, right? That was their goal. It's already the second largest city in Iowa, and it has been, but in 1893 it collapses. Sioux City just almost virtually collapses. Why? Financial panic of 1893, meaning money suddenly wasn't available. And if you don't have cash in this era, you don't have anything. You don't have the ability to build. You don't have the ability to grow. And of course, we had one of those financial contractions that happens, and we're still aware of them when things get out of sync and money is being spent like crazy, and suddenly you've got things that happen and people just pull back. People being the guys with the deep pockets, right? And because of that collapse, now in short supply, Sioux City has to change its direction a little bit. Now, it happens across the country, but Sioux City will have really difficult problems because they were overextended at this point. And it's going to continue into the 1900s for them. They'll just get back on their feet. There's going to be a little mini financial panic, but that one will hit Sioux City hard too. So what comes out of all this is, instead of people that are out there trying to get credit and everything, the Main Street people become boosters. What do I mean by boosters? Do you remember that term? That's your local businessmen and everybody else telling nothing but the good news story about their town. They're out there to convince everybody this is the place you want to be. You want to invest your money here. You want to be here. How come? Because you're going to make money. It's going to be great. It'll be wonderful. Well, labor problem? We don't have any labor problems. Oh, other problems? We don't have any problems with that, right? It's all good news. It has to be good news. And if you're not telling the good news story, what are you? Oh, you're one of those. those, right? You're one of those. We don't see anything like this today, right? That never happens today, does it? Somebody stands up and says, well, yeah, but I think we could. No, you don't have to do that. All right. Boosterism is a big deal in the early 20th century, and it will go on into the 1950s. But everybody is into this. If you go around, you will find that maps like this exist at this time of the early 20th century, specifically for the reason that everybody's using them to say, hey, you got to hear about my town. Look what we've got. Look what's here. This is so great, right? So remember, Sioux City is in an incredible position. This is the perfect hub at the perfect time in America. Remember, we've got all these huge cities blowing up into big population centers. Those people have to be able to eat. And where are they going to get that food? They're going to get it at the other end of the rail line. And where do those railroads lead to? Sioux City, Iowa. And it's the perfect place. Every single thing that the farms could produce could be sold and shipped out on railroads. Sioux City has 6 railroads at this point. No other place in Iowa has even 5, and most places across the country are lucky if they can boast of 3. Sioux City is a big deal, and it's that hub of the farm and rail connection to the major cities. Now, all of this had been very good for Sioux City, and they had drawn in money from the East Coast for investments. It's like today, everybody's looking for a way. If you got money, you need a place to invest it where you're going to make money, right? That's why people play the stock market, isn't it? Well, back then, they'd find places to invest, and Sioux City was one of those places you'd invest, and you'd see it then in the buildings being built. And many of those are still around today. You know, these are huge commercial buildings rising out of nothing, and we see them. You know, all of these, and of course, much of that we saw invested into the idea of an early form of boosterism, the idea of the corn palaces showing just how incredible we are, right? But also in public buildings like the PV Opera House. All of these coming in. And the reason I'm going back in time to mention this is because we've got local businesses that are starting here. Big packing plants, they're happening, and it's local money. By the way, that's the 1888 railroad bridge that everybody was looking forward to because it'd be that vital connection. Of course, the problem was once it was built, the railroad company that built it said, yeah, this is just for us, nobody else, okay? Which meant, hey, let's start a combination bridge, combination meaning both horse and buggy and railroad, right? But with all of that, we've got incredible things happening in Sioux City. All of these things happening, and then, as I said, the 1893 collapse followed by the 1900 collapse. You've got all of these things going away. By the way, University of the Northwest. Do we have any Morningside grads here? Yeah, you know. So, built in 1890. And of course, here's the pontoon bridge. You know, the famous small bridge with a mighty thirst on the other side because, of course, they'd kicked all the saloons off out of Sioux City briefly. But you know this is a later picture because the combination bridge is almost finished, right? And my point being, it's not just agriculture, we're a manufacturing area as well. So we see why this exists, why this map is here, telling people the good news story about Sioux City. Remember, it's this time that Central is built, right? Still with us today. But that crash almost sinks Sioux City because the promoters lost everything, mainly because the main company they created held all of the loans, all of the debt. And it's just barely that Sioux City comes back from it, because that means all of these things were bankrupt and many, many more. But the city steps up, approves a 2% tax to show they're serious. That bridge will be built, and steamboat actually going through with the swing gate open. So we see that Sioux City has accomplished much. But now we're into the 20th century, and with that, we've got an increase in income, in sales, in transportation, markets. There's increased work at all of those packing plants. That means more wealth for the owners, but it also means jobs for the workers. Because new forces are driving America. Industrialization, improved transportation, all of this results in big business, and big business wants cheap costs, and labor was their target. Increasing immigration. But the other problem is what happens after a crash? We've seen it recently. We've seen it. We saw it in 08. We saw it again just a few years ago. When you have a big crash, the people who still have all the money buy up everything that's on the board, right? It's just like playing Monopoly. And that's exactly what happened here. Those independent packers that we had in Sioux City, they become absorbed by the national chains. And the national chains are more interested in counting pennies for the workers. And what that means is decreased income for workers in Sioux City. So that's the world that Wallace Short is moving into in Sioux City. Sudden massive wealth by factory owners, corrupt business practices by those big businesses, and it leads to economic distress for millions across the country, and Sioux City is no different. Sioux City is right on the bubble for the same thing. Within a decade after those good years and good money, we suddenly see, while incomes are growing, the income disparity is greater than any time in U.S. history. Workers make less as the 20 years between the 1900 and 1920 occurs. What's that going to mean? That means you're going to have labor unrest. And where are you going to have that at? Right here in River City, folks, right? Okay. And of course, the real issue is the same one we face every year, year in and year out, today and every year thereafter. The real issue is the country will not face the real issues, right? They're not going to take on any of this. Laws were created by businesses to create excessive money. The excessive money allowed them to make contributions to politicians and legislatures, and what that would mean is no laws would address these core problems. I say all that because that explains why the churches suddenly have to take the lead. That's why we went through all that, to understand the situation as we get into this. By the way, the Fuller Court, filled with older judges, always found laws to be in accordance with what? The businesses, right? So, with no government rules, you've got 7-day work weeks, job industries, deaths on the job are not unusual. So, with all this, the issue that finally hits the public, it'll actually be lack of sanitation in meat processing, won't it? That's what'll finally get the public's attention. You know, when Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle, suddenly we care because it impacts all of us as well. That growth of business power and trust leads to the growth of unions, but strikes are lawless. Government regularly entered on the owner's side. Resulting violence would scare the public. So you've got all of these things building up to this moment. Antitrust laws are used against labor, not business. And with no relief in the courts, you suddenly have an appeal to socialism growing rapidly. And again, We're talking Sioux City, Iowa. Desire for cheap labor, unrestricted immigration, huge slums, child labor across the country, and of course, unsafe working conditions which will kill numerous workers. So the lessons that came down during his early years, he had the lessons of the Civil War and what happens when government can't make things work. The economic hardships for working people are a reality, and yet he has an unbridled belief in democracy. These are the issues that would create who Wallace Short is. He wants to be a minister, and he does, and he will work in a couple of places and then work in Kansas City, and he becomes very popular there. But a Sioux City group comes down to Kansas City, listens to him speak, excuse me, and they come back. They believe they have found the right man to fill the pulpit in the Sioux City church. Now, things have been going fine for him in Kansas City. It's a good place for him. But he feels after his first visit to Sioux City that Sioux City is the place he should be, mainly because of the massive number of people that are there of all walks of life. Now, he didn't hide any of his social justice beliefs. The people that hired him knew that's how he felt. He was an outspoken person in defense of the worker in Kansas City. He doesn't hide any of the feelings, and the biggest feeling that he does not hide is one that is absolutely in the face of everything that the majority of Americans believe. He thinks temperance movement. What's that? Outlawing alcohol, right? He thinks that the temperance movement should be decided by individuals for themselves. If you cannot control yourself, no law will ever control it for you. That was his belief. Does that sound really out there? Not to us today, right? But at the time, that was absolutely crazy talk for that era. Now remember, Sioux City, second largest town in Iowa, 47, almost 48,000 people, largest meat processor in the country, largest in Iowa, but it's fifth in the country. It's the same is true for the stockyards. It's the largest in Iowa. It's really one of the largest anywhere. It's fifth in the nation. It's also Iowa's largest manufacturing center. It's also Iowa's largest wholesaling center. In other words, it's a regional powerhouse. And as I said before, largest railroad center. 6 lines serving the city, 5 have terminals here. He becomes a fixture in Sioux City almost immediately because he steps outside his first week of work, steps outside his church, and is accosted by 3 men who attempt to rob him. They want his money, but more importantly, they're trying to take a watch that had been given to him by somebody very special. He breaks his cane over one robber's head and then runs back to the sanctuary, gets in and locks the door. When he reports it to the police, a week later they make a big deal. They award him with a sturdier cane with a gold handle, and on it is saying, "Keep up the good work." He's a man made for Sioux City, obviously. Now, remember, Sioux City has always been notoriously a wet city, right? Meaning it had alcohol. Now, it had 75 saloons back in 1890. Well, now things have changed. Iowa has got more serious about this idea of being a dry state. So now Sioux City only has 47 saloons, just so you know. Okay? All right. Still the second largest city, only 47 saloons. They have passed laws that say, hey, we have the right to figure this out ourselves. Yeah. Whatever your state law says, we don't care. This is still ours. Oh, what do? You pay a $600 fine up front. That's how you're allowed to be a saloon. Well, they cracked down on it. Now it's $900. Ooh, okay. Now, he's very successful with his church. He's well liked by most. notes that most of his parishioners are well-to-do, and they include some of the most powerful men in Sioux City. In fact, both publishers of the newspapers, there's two newspapers in Sioux City, the Journal and the Tribune, are both members of his church, and the only thing is they sit on opposite sides of the aisle. You know, we can't talk to the other side, come on. But with all of this, he doubles the size of his church almost immediately. But we have to remember things are changing, right? Over that 5 years, war is drawing closer to America, mainly because it's coming to Europe. And we start having a fear of Germans, then socialists, then just all the others. Remember, business and that immigration issue is bringing all of those people to Sioux City. Yet people are becoming less and less kind toward those people. Remember, Nebraska is one of the largest German-speaking school systems, is the largest state in the country with German-speaking schools, right up until World War I. Now, why was it? Because they wouldn't let the Germans, of course, into the American school system. So it was kind of one of those de facto things. But with World War I, they wiped all those out. Now you have to be part of this. Amazing how this works, isn't it? But Short believes that all people deserve to be ministered to. And he believes in going to where the people are, which means usually outdoor picnics for laborers. By the way, how many outdoor places are there for laborers in Sioux City? Maybe one, maybe two. That's one of the things that bothers him. Lots of things happen. There's lots of clubs you can be a member of if you're wealthy. There's not much you can do at all if you're not wealthy. And in fact, we don't like seeing all those people at the parks, right? Yeah, it's a public park, but we don't want you there, really. But thus, the Riverside Park becomes a very important place as well. Easily just across the river from another state. Makes it easy, right? Okay. So, he speaks to these people. He advocates for them. And with that, the tensions are on the rise within his own church. The interesting thing is, it's not really within the majority of his church. It's within the deacons. And who are the deacons? All those people that are the big names in town, right? The battle begins because the Anti-Saloon League is one of the most powerful organizations in the country. But it's exceedingly powerful in Sioux City, Iowa, because of course the fight is right here. It's a wet city, right? And they've already made some progress. We already said they shut down half the taverns. Hey, we can see this happen. We can make it happen. What they would do is they would lean on the ministers to give them the pulpit to make their pitch. By the way, the other thing that Wallace Short had never hidden, he had become a member of the Bartenders Union while he was in Kansas City. He did not imbibe himself, despite all the rumors. He also did not necessarily believe in imbibing, but he also believed that this was yet one more thing that people with money were allowed to do, but not people without money. People with money could drink it in their own homes behind closed doors, right? Whereas the people here would go to the bars. And one of his points was, where else do you expect them to go? You've got 2, maybe 3 parks they can go to. What else do you have for them? What else? Where are they going after work? What outlet do they have other than those bars? That was his question. Short absolutely refused to allow the League to use his pulpit. The pulpit is for the word of God, not for the word of man, and definitely not for political purposes. Ooh. And with that, the fuse is lit. Short could easily have compromised. He could have damped down the issues, but we see a lifelong trait begin. If Wallace Short believes he is right, compromise is off the table. It is not going to happen. He demands that he has the authority within his church, meaning not the deacons, meaning not the rest of the church, that as minister, he's the one who decides these things. A secret vote is held. They won't tell him the result of the vote. It's just the deacons. It'll take a week before they finally tell him, and when they do, the answer, of course, is you're out. Now, with that, though, he is also being maligned publicly as a drinker, and when that's not enough, of course, because there's a lot of his people that say, yeah, so then it's said that he's serving young men alcohol out of his basement. Again, totally made up, nothing like that. You know, as I said, the Congregational Church included influential people. After all the Anti-Saloon League smears that Short is a drinker, Short and the church are going to part in May of 1914. Now, here's something that's never talked about. The person who is in charge of the Woodbury County Anti-Saloon League, his name is Claude McMillan. He's a former Methodist minister, and he is paid $3,600 a year. Now, Wallace Short was paid very well as a minister. He got something like $2,400 a year. You can see that this is a substantial amount of money, and he and Short had disagreed rather strongly when McMillan had come to talk to him about it. It then became personal on McMillan's side, and thus all of the backstabbing and everything else. McMillan was not going to lose this job. When he did leave, about half of the church followed him and said, we don't care where you go. We don't care where you preach. We want to go with you. Now, he doesn't have a church building, so he ends up alternating between the two theaters in town. And they call it the Central Church. The problem is the Anti-Saloon League will not leave him alone. They are still mad at him because they expected him to go away, to become a minister somewhere else, to get out of their town. He instead says, no, I think I have a job to do here. Really, a big job. And thus stays. Everything escalates. They get him defrocked by the Congregational Church Authority. Now, there are a couple of people on the board of that will resign rather than vote against him because they had known him for much of his life. And some of the biggest names in the Congregational Church system knew him and knew of him and could not believe any of these stories. But he is still defrocked. And with that, when he pulls together the Central Church, he says, well, I'm not allowed to do sacrament. I'm not allowed to do all of these other things. So I'm going to focus on the things that I think matter today, which is social justice. The idea that a community should give all individuals and groups within that community fair treatment. These attacks on him would never end. Never. The League would spearhead them and would succeed in all their efforts, but they cannot stop him from talking about social justice. Now, just a little aside, let's look at where Sioux City is at this point. Anybody recognize that building? Morningside, right? After the fire. But all of these different buildings, this is when a huge building phase is going on in Sioux City. By the way, here's Kresge's. Everybody remember Kresge's? Remember that. It's going to become important in a little bit here. Knapp and Spencer, those two big warehouses right down at the beginning of town. As I said, we're a warehousing area. You got all of these important buildings. Anybody recognize that? Commerce Building, right? And of course, this is when we see the Woodbury County Courthouse being built. But here's some things to think about. In 1915, almost 18% of Sioux City was foreign born. Another third were first generation born in America. What that means is half of the people in Sioux City were within one generation of being new to America. And by 1920, social workers in Sioux City would identify 21 different nationalities. Now I'm just going to ask you, in your experience in life, does that make any difference? Do you get unrest and uneasiness as these groups rub together with the people that have decided they're the ones in power, right? It happens. It hasn't changed, right? But remember as well, this is a time when almost all the agricultural work is still done by hand. This is early 1920s as we're getting steam engines involved, but most of them are done by hand. And of course, throughout the entire Great Plains, you've got these groups of migrant labor moving through to harvest the wheat, right? So what happens, of course, is Sioux City becomes a nice place to stop at the end of the year. By the end of the harvest, you've got many of them that are staying here to try to find a place. But Sioux City policy was to enforce vagrancy laws, make it so that these people couldn't stay. But of course, they don't have anywhere else to go, do they? And it's into this that Wallace Short will step as well. You know, some of these men would find subsistence level work cutting ice in the winter. Barely keeps them fed. But in 1914, 1915, there's suddenly a new option. The Industrial Workers of the World Soup Kitchen is opened at a place now named Socialist Hall, and the people eating there can hear the possibility of earthly salvation rather than, oh, you know, when you die, you know, if you're a good person, you'll have salvation. No, via unionization and organization. Sioux City's ruling class really wasn't happy to have this message being broadcast. Even more so, they're especially not happy because it's the IWW. What's the problem with the IWW? Yeah, they had come to embrace socialism. Unlike the other labor unions that had come up and to be able to stay in existence, all of those had said, oh no, we're firm believers in capitalism. You too can make it to the top. The IWW, after the Pullman strike and after so many others, all said, nah, that isn't going to happen. You know, the only way, we need to organize, unionize, and by the way, take over, okay? Just take over the businesses. So you can see that's not going to be really popular with business owners, right? So, you know, those are leaders who had become avowed socialists. And Sioux City has to deal with this problem. It's 1915. It's that first winter, early year 1915. You know, you've just got Wallace Short moving into his new church. He's down there talking to these folks. He's getting to know them. But City Council, on the other hand, they thought escalating tactics would drive the unemployed out of, and the IWW out of town. The IWW had actually targeted Sioux City. They said, this is our place. This is where we're going to go. We know Sioux City. We can make this work. Well, the City Council, first step, oust them from Liberty Hall, where they were to speak, renamed as Socialism Hall. They arrest any of them that then try to speak outside in the streets as a public safety measure. You know, but IWW says, now we're going to organize these guys. And Short, although he disagrees with the philosophy of socialism, says that they still have the right to speak. It's called freedom of speech. Remember that unbridled belief in democracy that he always held. He stood up for their right to speak publicly. Well, you know, this is no big deal for a guy that's already stood up to the Anti-Saloon League. You know, what else you going to do to me? Tar and feather me? They would have if they could have. Don't think that this is isolated. The IWW is trying across the country to become known. And notice one of the bigger circles there, Sioux City, Iowa. How did Sioux City then progress? They built a public stockade so that they could shame anybody that is made a prisoner, because they'll be seen there every day. And they bring in rocks. They bring in a rock pile to have them break the rocks as part of their punishment. And on March 26th, police arrest 14 Wobblies for holding street meetings. Police were criticized, in which their big crime, they had criticized the police. They charge them with vagrancy and disturbing the peace and haul them off. So, what really happens is, the way it's written up, one Wobbly is arrested, 13 others follow him and the police to jail, and then, jeering the police, they're arrested. All of them are sentenced to 30 days in jail and a $100 fine. 30 more are arrested while speaking in public, and they're thrown in with them. So now we've got a local jail holding 49 of the Wobblies. The Wobblies, on the other hand, say, hey, we know how this works. They refuse to cooperate in court and in jail. They refuse to plead. They refuse to take any oath. They refuse to remove their hats in the courtroom. Man, now you have crossed the line. When they're faced with work on the stockpile, they go on strike. They also begin a hunger strike. And they say, these clothes you've given us are infested with vermin, so they burn them publicly. So now you've got near-nude guys hanging out in a public stockade. Oh, this is going real well. And when the firemen show up to put out the fire, they preach to the firemen. Beatings do not dampen their resolve to resist, and the city suddenly is at a loss of, what's our next move? We can't figure it out. And the Wobblies keep showing up. As I said, the Wobblies have targeted this area. They decided they'll just keep sending in more people and see how many that stockade holds. So now up to 82 men in jail, refusing to work on the rock pile, hunger strike, burning of blankets. After the fight between security and those in jail, the mayor offers them their freedom if they never return to Sioux City. And the Wobblies say, nah, we like it here. The sheriff resigns, the men are freed, all the men in the jail are released. Now, it is, across the country, a victory for the IWW. And you get further away from Sioux City, it is considered a victory for freedom of speech. Because that's what they were arrested for, really. Daring to speak in a public location. Now remember, that all sounds fine, but remember the date. It's 1915, and we're coming closer and closer to World War I. And as World War I develops, and Wilson says we're going in, suddenly there's a lot of people, the Amish, the Mennonites, the Quakers, and many Irish, Germans, and others who oppose the draft. 67,000 would claim conscientious objector status. 300,000 people in America would not register for the draft. Now, a later court will say, Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. That's the First Amendment. No law means no law. He wasn't on the Supreme Court then. Wilson, once he asked for the declaration of war, viewed any opposition to the war as treasonous, including any expressions. And anybody who tried to talk somebody out of being drafted was liable to be arrested. Rather famous person for that, some guy named Eugene Debs. And he's out on parole saying you dare not speak against the war, and specifically the only law is to not, tell people to not serve. He says, seeking profits at home and plunder abroad, the master class has always taught you it's your patriotic duty to go to war and have yourself slaughtered. Secret Service agents that were watching him would testify against him. He would serve in jail, and as long as Wilson was going to be president, he was going to rot in jail. And of course, this time he gets 10 years, but in doing so, he will, of course, run for president and get a few million votes. But anyway, so Post-war, of course, remember, all those unions had agreed to hold the wages steady. And afterwards, they're saying, now that you're making big money, we expect to get those raises we put off. And a wave of strikes sweep across the country. At the same time, you've got the Great Migration going on out of the South as the Ku Klux Klan has pushed people out of the, they have essentially practiced the effort to say, hey, one less voter, one less vote against us, right? With that, all of things are changing. You suddenly got new things happening in America. The acceleration of business via technology, restrictions on increases in wages, all of this is coming to a head, and all of this is coming to a head right now. But in our country, anytime we see strike, we see a red flag. We believe that it has to be socialism. It can't be just people wanting money. In 1918, though, labor comes to Wallace Short and says, we'd like you to run for mayor. And he's going, I've got a congregation here. And he goes, yeah, but it's not, you can do this. And he does pick up the challenge. He is, of course, the current mayor vigorously arraigns him. The mayor says that when he spoke at a meeting in Chicago where he was called to testify about as a character witness for some of the IWW people, the mayor claims that he said the same things that Eugene Debs said, and should be in prison. Now with that, labor stands behind him. He's an unspoken advocate and will be elected mayor, much to the surprise of the ruling party in Sioux City, Iowa. Stunned is a better word. Now, he's an outspoken advocate on all labor issues. Those include better working conditions, shorter working hours, and better pay. Man, that's as communist as it gets, isn't it? So, now remember, the Supreme Court has only recently wavered. They didn't really come out and say you could be part of a union, but they said, there's certain things that aren't, just because the union did it doesn't mean that they should be in prison. Now, despite all the strong opposition, he's actually elected in his first term. This is what he faces. First month, he actually helped settle a pending strike between the power company and the workers. And he pulls it off much to the happiness of both sides. Everything looks good, but then within the first couple of months, the rough disaster, the influenza outbreak, misconduct by another council member who had been on the labor ticket, and all the issues with the Wobblies come back, all create a perfect combination of factors. Those people that lost say he's incompetent. We're going to run him out of office. We're doing this new thing called a recall election. Pioneered by his type of people, but we'll use it. Now remember, the rough disaster, that's where they were rebuilding one of the buildings downtown. 39 people would die in this disaster, and the resulting fire and everything else. Now, part of the issue is when he took office, the guy that had been in charge of public safety had resigned. The one that they put in place as a temporary holder never said he was the guy that was going to be it, but he had been the assistant. He had been to the place the day before and said, yeah, this is safe. So they try, of course, to tie that to Short. And that IWW issue was the fact he'd gone to Chicago, a gathering for the IWW, and while he's there, he invites them to hold their convention in Sioux City. Nothing small there, right? Now, big thing, how's he do in the recall election? He wins hands down. There's not even a chance. He will serve, I think it's 4 terms as mayor. Now remember, this is at the same time, think about this, Main Street, what's the whole point of that? Boosterism, got to be positive, got to just show your best side. Oh, all this labor unrest, this is terrible for Sioux City. Yeah, by the way, Main Street, something we teach today, everything else. Best-selling book, 1921. It will be banned in many Minnesota libraries. Just mentioning that, right? Where did it take place at? Minnesota. So, Short easily recalls, overcomes the recall election, and as mayor, he pushes for new parks, for roads, for social justice for all. Remember, there's a reason for that, because this is also the time of the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. And we may think of the Ku Klux Klan as being strictly in the South, right? Realize it was very, very strong in northwest Iowa, right? And throughout the Great Plains. So, you've got all of these things that are happening. And of course, who is it that the Klan is against? Of course, obviously the Negro, but also anybody who's different, the prime difference being if you're a Catholic or a Jew, and then if you happen to be anybody that's not from America. Now, we've got lots of things going on, but all of these things, Short will work to come up with different negotiated agreements. He overcomes labor strikes, protesting the conditions in the meatpacking industry when they'd shut down, and when those plants bring in strike breakers, Mayor Short alerts the city police, stops the trains at the edge of town, gets on them, and says, "Boys, we're going for a ride," and takes them right back out of town and says, "You can get off and leave here. Come into town, we'll arrest you." So, yet there are actions, and at one point a striker is killed. Short would decide to preside over his funeral when no minister would step up. 2,000 men escorted the body to the resting place. The problem is his own police are now incensed because, according to them, the striker had already killed a deputy, and the deputy that he'd killed was the son of the sheriff. So, remember, though, at this point, with all of these things, with the things he's trying to prevent, nationally, all of the same things are coming to a head. The belief that the Ku Klux Klan is a good group. And remember, in Sioux City, an ominous spectacle of a burning fiery cross, the official signal of the Ku Klux Klan, was witnessed by hundreds of residents of North Riverside late Saturday night. The flaming emblem of the so-called Invisible Empire, first seen on the hill overseeing Military Road at 10 o'clock at night. Then one erupts at the top of the Kresge's building. So he would stand up to the Klan. So many businessmen, of course, did not want to risk loss of their income. And there are many cases of secret notes being delivered. There are many cases of people, actually members of the Klan, who are the owners of those businesses. He would name names. And at the same time, because he would meet with these folks and they'd be imploring him, "Oh, just join us. Be on our side. Everything will be fine." And of course, remember what I said about his point about compromise? Not going to happen. He ends up right. He refuses to allow them to march in Sioux City on the public roads. He says, "You want to take off the hoods? You bet. No problem. But if you want to go hooded like any other thief in the night, forget it. If you will not demonstrate who you are, there is no way possible you're going to get this." And he would go to meetings and denounce the Klan openly. Many people would take that side step of trying to avoid it. He openly denounced them. So, he doesn't back down, he doesn't mince words. The Klan is worse than any supposed evil it pretends to fight. There's a Klan march scheduled for Morningside Avenue, and it will be held after he leaves office by the person who replaces him, of course, one of those businessmen. By the way, you might notice the KKK conclave at the Klan grounds. That's on the Denison Highway, east end of Morningside, the Klan grounds. You go through northwest Iowa and you will find tons of parks that are created originally for the Klan. Because, of course, being the businessmen, they could come up with the money to be able to do that, and the cities and the other churches would accept it. This was found by Abby Sitzman. That is actually an invite signed, and that's for Sioux City. And this is from the State Historical Society of Iowa. This is actually a picture after that march at that conclave ground after he had left office. And different memorabilia that family members find years later. Now remember, in a city with a high number of minorities, Short stands with them and against the businessmen that are backing the Klan. He's smeared by false claims by KKK men in business, finds the Temperance League is again standing against him at the same time, yet he never takes his foot off the throttle. He never backs off. He does not ease up, despite the big names in the farm movement that he respects that are asking him to lay off the KKK because so many of them are members. He leaves office and he turns to journalism. First as editor of the Sioux City Union Advocate, where he will greatly increase the readership 10 times over. He ends up in an argument with that guy and ends up starting his own paper, and he'll run it until he's 83 years old. In 1930, he's elected to the Iowa legislature and serves a 2-year term. Now, of course, in the future, we've got the farm crisis and everything else. Just to tell you, Wallace Short will be there for the farmer. He will show up. He will be there to advocate for them. With that, this man did an incredible amount of things in his short time. He considered himself a centralist Republican. A contemporary at the State Heart said, he's so far left the Republican Party can't see him at all. In reality, he was a progressive. So what was the Sioux City situation in 1910? Do you have an idea now? Did you have an idea before we started? Why is Wallace Short distrusted by business owners before he's elected? He's already been talking to the other side, those laborers. Oh my gosh. What do you think he actually achieved? That's my question to you after hearing all this. Did he achieve anything?
So I hope you've enjoyed this look back at a person that we really should know better in Sioux City's history. He did some incredible things. Let's look at this. What did Wallace Short get right? He felt that all people were equals, no matter what their background, their heritage, or their religion. Remember, this is at such a tough time because the huge influx of immigrants were setting people on edge. We've seen it in our own lifetime. This is one of those issues that never goes away. And why does it happen? Because businesses get the laws that they want to allow those immigrants to come in, and yet it's the people who live here that are not happy about them coming in because they're different. The problem is Wallace Short had seen the destruction wrought by unbridled big business. And to that point, injuries, deaths on the job because there are no laws that say that the workplace must be safe. And of course, if somebody's injured, you're just off the payroll. You can't show up to work. Oh well. And if you're dead, well, what happens to your wife and kids? Well, I hope you saved some money there. Well, on what you gave us, we don't have any money. Well, that's not our problem. So, having seen that destruction, he felt that government should be on the side of the people, which was an idea that was totally out there in those days. By out there, I mean a long ways out. As we heard, the people he served alongside in the State House felt he was so far to the left, and of course he felt he was simply a centrist, but definitely conservative. Now, we also saw that although the Prohibition movement was very popular prior to the actual amendment banning liquor, he had never supported it. And this was one of those examples where he realized it really couldn't work. That temperance, he meant the concept of temperance, where you temper your wants, where you take control of that. And he felt that temperance in all things was important, whatever your wants and desires and everything else. So he was a forward thinker. Now, what he got wrong, he could be, I say hard to get along with, he could be impossible to get along with. And his greatest fault was probably that, the hubris, the nature that just said, I'm right, you're wrong, and I don't have to listen to you. Now, his biggest fault in public was he would stick with people. He was very loyal. But even after those people started to go wrong, it had to be proven to him that they had gone wrong. So he would continue to speak well of many people like Huey Long, like Father Coughlin, both of whom started to show that their belief in democracy and his were far apart. Because of course Huey Long really was setting himself up as a despot and a dictator, and in some of the worst concepts of socialism. And of course Father Coughlin had made that turn from supporting the little guy to then going on, and his anti-Semitic side was coming out. So that was a big deal, at this time. And he missed that. But when it was brought to him, he became one of Conklin's biggest critics and most outspoken ones. Something else he got wrong, because he was always on the side of the farmers, that he had sympathy for the farmers. As Iowa began to realize that tuberculosis in bovine stocks was a reality, after science had proven it, the farmers raised up against it, because by 1931 they could not stand any more losses. And the idea of having somebody come in, test your cattle, and say, oh, these have TB, they have to be destroyed, and here's a few $100 for your, to offset that. And of course that didn't even cover the price they should have gotten for one animal. And he understood that. His sympathy for the farmers put him on the wrong side of this issue. Instead of being on the side of science and trying to lead people forward, in this first crisis before the big farm crisis, it became known as the Cow War, he was out there for the farmers. Now, on the other hand, being in the legislature, he did try to get them more money in payments as well. So what's his legacy? The minorities, the poor, the working class should not be treated differently. He also refused to pander to anyone, rich or poor. We have that today, right? We see people suck up to the rich, and we see them, essentially blather nonsense to the poor just to tell them anything to get their vote. He did not believe in that. He would tell them the truth as he saw it. Remember, his first act, standing up for free speech. Now, he carried that out when he hired somebody who would write for his paper, and that person would put together a well-researched, well-reasoned article and put it into, Short's own newspaper, even though it completely differed with Short, the publisher, he would let it stand. Well, he would chew on that author and make it clear to them in no uncertain terms how unhappy he was with him, but he did not, if the facts were in the article, he did not take it out of the paper. In essence, he gave up his comfort for his beliefs. He stood by people. He stood up to power, even at a time when power, as we saw, would remove him from his job. He spoke the truth, even though he knew that would mean he probably would not get reelected. After his time in office, after he left the mayor's position and did not get elected to the legislature, he would personally attend and cover the Iowa legislature from 1932 on, and he would report on it in his paper. The legislators would read his paper. They'd consider his points, even if they didn't agree. And, the populist movement, as it still existed, would seek his recommendations. Both governors and national leaders would listen to him, would seek the recommendations. They might not follow him completely, but they would not ignore him. And that is, certainly a legacy. In the end, he would say, I never thought of retiring. When God is ready for me to quit, he will push the button. Now, Short never slowed down. In post-World War II, he would fight McCarthyism. He would fight the idea of loyalty oaths. He would fight the concept of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He stood up to the people fanning the Red Scare. He had felt that civil rights were retreating after World War II, and he vigorously fought against this. So his detractors could easily dismiss him in the era of the Red Scare because they painted him red. But as we look back, we can see he was right. Now, I believe in about 1948 or 49, he would have a stroke, and that would slow him down. And even then, he did not stop until his death in the early 50s. And in the end, two things. One, shortly before his death, the Iowa Congregational Church reinstated him as a minister, and that was a touching moment for him. But in the end, while not necessarily in Sioux City, he would be recognized for all of his efforts across the country. The Dubuque Leader would write, if any editor lived up to the dictum of Joseph Pulitzer, to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, that man was Wallace Short of Sioux City. That is the legacy. That's the person I was happy to tell you about today. I hope you enjoyed the program. And, I want to thank the Sioux City Public Museum for all of the support they've given me and the help with this program and others, and they have lots more information. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at Russ Gifford at russgifford.net. And thank you again, and I hope to see you at one of my future programs. Take care, everyone. Good night.